what I'm going to do in this presentation is go through the next set of things we're introducing at this event. The first thing we did was Commerce Plus that you heard from Raju. And I'm going to take you to two other products. And one is in the area of marketing automation. So in the way we automate marketing in keeping with marketing requirements of the modern world. And the second one is on the orchestration of work itself, which is the fundamental reason why you actually use business software. I'm going to give you a brief walk through the history of marketing in about 6 slides, all right, to give you a sense of how we've absorbed what's happened over the span of history and worked it into how we think our products should be that represent this for you. Then I'll talk about some things that have evolved in the way people have responded to marketing and messaging, and how that has informed the way we build our own products. So that's the first part that I'm going to go through. So let me get started with where this was. So the first thing about marketing, when it started, it was all word of mouth. Well, you're hearing that back again now, but it was word of mouth. Now, I'm not sure if it was words, maybe they were grunts, but it was how people communicated. And so here's something that may suggest that quickly at the heels of marketing was a way to start selling more to the customers, upselling people. So this is a little cartoon done by one of our own graphic artists. I thought it might be useful to put it here. So once we put that together, the next big breakthrough was the printing press, and that took about, what, 1,500 years or more, or even much more, maybe 2,000-3,000 years from that first breakthrough. So this was in the middle of the 15th century, thanks to a very industrious German, Johannes Gutenberg. We had the printing press around the middle of that century, 1450, and it opened up doors for a lot of things, changed the way people communicate with each other. And as you know, messaging, communication, marketing follows the communication platforms that come into place during that era. So right after that, a very early adopter of the printing press was Martin Luther, another industrious German. And you've all probably heard the story of him pinning that his 95 thesis on the door of his church in Wittenberg. And, well, he was also a marketer. He knew the printing press has come along, and he printed out a whole bunch of these copies, spread it all around Germany, Saxony, and you had the first marketer. And thanks to that marketing that happened at that time, mass marketing had actually arrived. And we have 800 million Protestants across the world today they have to thank marketing for their religion. So that was the first thing that happened in the middle of around the 15th century. So then the printing press was the primary way people communicated for a good long time, right? And then it was several hundred years went by before other types of communication came on. And this was newspapers and billboards came right off. And you can see the dates there. In 1690, you had the first newspaper that was published, and this was back in Boston, and it was a short. I think it was just a few pages. So it turns out that this newspaper made an allegation that the King of France was actually sleeping with his daughter-in-law, and so they had to pull this after the first edition. So as you can see, the first newspaper came out. Scandalous journalism was quick to follow. And of course, censorship was quick to follow as well. Advertising was a little bit behind, not too behind, about 15 years. And then you had the first ad that came out in a newspaper. So the first ad was actually also in the Northeast. And it was for a piece of real estate. So it was actually a property, I think it was in Long Island. And at least they weren't selling a bridge, they were selling a real property. So that was the first ad that came out at that time. So then you had a number of years, a number of centuries, where nothing much changed. You know, that was the that was the main medium by which people communicated, until you came into the beginning of the last century and you hit the big first mass medium, which was beyond print, and that was the radio. And the first people to use radio were actually politicians. They spotted early the potential of this to get to people, and campaigns were the first things that were actually used to reach out to people and influence people on the radio. A couple of decades later, you had, of course, the medium that all of us grew up with, and that was television. And you had, here again, the first television ad was, right there, you can see it. It was for a watchmaker. And this was about 20 years after you had radio. And then, of course, in the 1990s, things changed quite a bit. Several other media came into play, and you started to see the spread of the web and the new kinds of marketing that came in as a consequence of that. The first ad, click ad, was display ad actually, was for AT&T, and this was on hotwired.com, which still exists today, back in '94. What do you think was the click rate? So it was actually 44%. You know, to put that in context, today, display ads are about 0.05%. That is 5 clicks out of every 1,000. Here you had 4,400 clicks out of every 1,000. So that tells you how media gets used or abused, or its efficacy changes over time. It also tells you something. Well, let's look back. Real estate ads are still around. Newspaper ads are still around. So marketing worked, right? We've got all of this that's still working today. So somehow all these media managed to deliver their messages, and we have these things existing even today. Okay, so let's move on to the digital era that gets me to the things that have influenced us when we build our products for you. So the first thing here is about changes in the digital era, and we've seen a few things that make sense. The move from single channels to multiple channels. And this was, what do I mean by this? Earlier marketing used a particular medium to get to people, and now you have multiple media. So you can see all of them. You can see mail, you can see social, you can see all the other things that have come up, the web, search, multiple media. So what does this mean? You have multiple ways to connect with the customer. You have multiple ways to connect with multiple customers and multiple ways to connect with the same customer. And a lot of the challenge of marketing today is to be able to get that 360 view, as they call it, across all the channels of that same single customer. So you can track them across, and you can understand and connect with them across all of these different media. So multiple channels came along. You still have single channel marketing approaches today. Good to think about very effective single channel marketing. Think about Twitter. Think about the one person who loves to use only Twitter and how effective that is. So you still have multiple and single levels of marketing. The second thing, change that came up is what I call intent. So marketing earlier had a single intent. It was generally a single intent. It was to project the company. It was to create awareness of that brand. And as it evolved, it started getting into multiple events, multiple intents, and you begin to see that today. Of course, you have branding, and then you have other things that people use marketing for. They use it to drive what's called purchase intent, or purchases, or culminating in a purchase. They use it to drive referrals, so you can bring other people to vouch for your business because they're already using it. And as Sridhar said, that's what we look forward to all of you doing for us, is to vouch for us and refer the use of our products. We're looking for loyalty. That's another intent of marketing. Once again, that's something we expect or we work to earn from you. We're looking at thought leadership. This is building content. So these are different types of intents in marketing that has evolved. And so the different channels have been used for these intents. They've been tailored for this, and connections are made between how do you establish the brand and how do you drive it immediately after with some sort of thought leadership. Then you get people to a point where they think they can engage, where you feel they can engage with you, and they're in a position to maybe look at some of your products or acquire some of your services. So you can see how all these intents come together in a much more sophisticated path today to connect with the customer and to earn the respect of their business. Okay, another change is you had mass approaches to personalized approaches. So this is, you are now in the age where tools are sophisticated enough, where you can connect with, in a very personalized way, with a very large number of people. So personalized ability to connect, you'll see some of that in the tools over the next 2 or 3 days, so watch for that. Another change here was what I call permissive marketing, which is do whatever you want, to permission marketing. Market only with the permission of your audience. You've seen this now being imposed through regulatory regimes around the world. The big acronym that you've probably seen over the last year is GDPR, which is the EU legislation to ensure privacy of citizens, and that's a forerunner to these kinds of legislative activities that are coming across the world. So that's the world of permission marketing. So if you were to look at it one way, it used to be don't ask, just tell, and now it is more like no ask, no tell. So if you don't ask, you can't tell. So that's where the world of marketing has now evolved to. So we've got yet another trend that we've seen is you had very few tools to help you with marketing. I'm sure a lot of you could relate that in the early days you probably used a spreadsheet, or you probably even used your calculator to do these things and figure things out, or you worked with a media agency if you were big enough and they sent you a report, and that's how you plan things. You had very few tools. And now there's a proliferation of tools, the tools in every aspect of marketing, from the targeting part of it, from the measurement part of it, from the reconnecting part of it, across all of these channels. In fact, it is the most, perhaps the right word is abused. The most abused part of technology has simply been in marketing. So I'm going to show you this really ugly slide. And if you can read it, you actually have a special talent. But this is actually a slide produced every year. And I can see some of the analysts in the front rows all beaming here. It's a slide that is produced every year, which is updated every year, which shows you the number of marketing technology companies out there. I think this last count was 5,000, am I right? Something like that? 7,000, that's what the pundits here tell me. It's 7,000. These are the number of companies, and all those are categories of products and so on. So it's actually become a mess. It's become really difficult to understand what you should do, what your company, what technologies make sense, are they even valuable, and how do you evaluate their use? So that's part of our thinking when we put together the marketing suite, is to make some sense out of that mayhem out there, is the ability to actually say that we'll put together a set of products that are well connected together and that work together and make it easy for customers to make some decisions and get on with their business rather than spend their time trying to understand and evaluate technology and cut through all the jargon of the different vendors. So that's part of what informed us. When we saw this mess, we actually knew we had a reason to be alive. So I've gone through an evolution of this whole thing, and I'm going to talk about some of the behavioral things that have changed. We saw some of the technology things that have changed. So what's changed in the way people behave and in the way society has responded to marketing? So I'll touch on a few trends here so you can see that. So the first thing here is that it turns out in the mass marketing world, people were treated as one entity, right? Or a common or similar entity. And now we find out that people are very different. Surprise, right? And they react differently, they're motivated differently, they engage differently, they're fickle, they change their minds, they make impulsive decisions. You know, how many times you go to a checkout counter and change your mind? How many of you go to shop at Costco and plan to come out with 40 bucks and you got 200 bucks? You're down 200 bucks, right? So that's what we do. That's what people do. So people are different, and so marketers need to appeal to different types of people. So that's one big change that's coming up. This is an important point. People are not rational. This is a myth that's been created by economists because you need to put some science into how you approach the science of economics, right? So there is this notion of rational intent. It does not really exist. We're seeing that now even in macroeconomies and in the way economists are revising their views of things. So people make decisions impulsively, and people don't act necessarily according to a prescribed set of rules or as an economist would call it, utility maximization models. I mean, people don't work that way. They're motivated by different things. So marketing has had to adapt. Because of all these changes with people, marketing has had to adapt. So you can see some of the things here. Personalized messages, a notion of journeys, and I will touch upon that. People go through journeys, and the journeys are different. And marketers have to recognize that people come from different walks of life, and they have these different traits, and they have to craft a path of engagement that's different for different people. So that's the notion of journeys. Notion of drip marketing, which is you don't just unload on your audience, you figure out when it makes sense, and you get to them when it makes sense, or you don't. Remember the permission marketing thing. And finally, we have lead scoring, the ability for you as a marketer of your product to assess how people are responding. So that's the best way to do it. So people come up with all these numbers and seem to think there's a lot of science around that. But the better way to think about it is you need to assess how people are doing. So you watch what they do. You watch their behavior. And then you start to identify that or connect that with how people respond and develop an idea of when people are ready to engage even further with you. So that's the notion of scoring. Second big behavioral trend is marketing has moved more quickly. Things shut down. People can't wait for your ads to play over a period of time or for you to run a long campaign that may take weeks or months or even years as it used to be because things change fast. Needs change, new needs come up. Seasons change if you're in the fashion business, and things are constantly evolving. So your marketing, your approach to marketing, your ability to measure it, your ability to adapt has to change because the whole field has changed. So that's another big trait change that has come out of this business. But how do you deal with that? Change is happening and change is quick, but marketing takes time. You have to do all of this stuff. You have to do planning. You have to plan out who you're going to go after, everything to do with your marketing plan. You have to design your content, your materials. How do you get after people? You have to do, there's design work, there's execution, all the things that you need to do to run programs. So how do you actually execute in a world where people are different, people are fickle, and things constantly change? So that's the role of what marketing technology needs to do or needs to address in today's world. Okay, and as you know, the thing we don't have is time. So marketing has had to adapt as well, and here are some of the things that I'd like to share with you, and you can see that in some of our products over the next 2 or 3 days. The notion of templates. So you create things that do half of the work for you. I do 3/4 of the work for you that you can just reuse. So it's a campaign, and you have whenever you deal with somebody who visits you for the first time or a fresh lead, you have a way to respond to them. You have a way to actually have a template to get to them and personalize it. So that's an example. Automation. When you watch someone work through a sales process, you see they do the same thing all the time with a particular type of lead. They come in, they send a response, they put it in the CRM, they inform somebody else in the company. So you should have a system watching that, like a Zia, which says, I can see these capabilities that you keep doing, and I'm simply going to automate it for you, create a workflow, and next time you're going to just use that. That's automation. Allows you to react faster to those pressures I talked about earlier. Dynamic marketing. So this is marketing on the fly. Since things change, you need to change, and you need to change midstream. You need to change in the middle of your campaign. You have to decide if something's working and switch out. So a lot of you have heard things like A/B testing and split marketing and things like that. That's all in this category of dynamic marketing. Optimization, of course, is trying to see what works and doing more of that, and trying to see what doesn't work and doing less of that. That's all there is to it. The third big trend here is you have all this execution. You have these multiple channels that have come out for marketing, but there is a lot of planning that goes into it. If you go back and see about 20 years ago, when some of these new channels started coming out, like especially the digital channels, CMOs were ignorant of this. They didn't know how it worked. I've worked with several media companies, ad agencies, who didn't know how this thing actually worked. They would actually create a small agency. Remember the proliferation of digital agencies about 20 years ago? They create this little agency that will just focus on that and understand that. And it wasn't the headache of the CMO office, because actually if the CMO was old enough, they probably hoped it would go away because they don't have to learn that stuff, right? So that's what actually happened. But that is here to stay. 45% of marketing budgets today goes into digital channels, 45%, and it's only increasing. So what's happened now is it's moved straight into the office of the head of marketing, or in large companies, the CMO, and now this whole process across all these channels, across all these methods, has to be orchestrated. It has to be planned, so it has to be budgeted, and it couldn't be left to different people handling different parts of marketing. So that's a big challenge in any marketing platform. How do you bring all this together and make it work across channels and create the right visibility for people at different levels? So that's the third big change. So I touched on this a little bit. So that's the orchestration part. You have execution, which is the execution of the marketing programs. You have the planning, which is the budgeting and stuff that goes with it. And finally, you have the execution, which is the dynamic aspect of what I talked about, dynamic aspect of marketing, the automation, and so on. So you're going to find, I meant orchestration. So the thing I wanted to bring up about orchestrations, you'll see that word thrown around a bit, even from us today. And it's, I thought about how to communicate this in a succinct way. So to put it in layman terms, or in non-jargon terms, I think orchestration is really executing a program against some sort of a plan in a way that you can readily adapt. So think about that applied to any aspect of your work, and you'll understand why work today, forget marketing, any aspect of work today needs to be orchestrated. Because you have to keep adapting and you have to keep evolving based on what the execution results you see against a plan that you had previously set up. Okay, so I'm going to use this word again today as I go through my presentation. So let me tell you how Zoho has gone through this whole thing. How have we responded to this whole piece? So the first thing here was, I'm going to just walk you through, many of you raised your hands as new customers. So these are a slew of Zoho marketing products. I think I've got all of them, but I maybe missed a couple. So you have a few of them are channel focused. So you can see Zoho Social, which is our single platform to work across all social channels. You can see campaigns, which is still the predominant digital channel, which is email campaigns. You can see other things there. You can see the website capabilities on the left. So we built, our strategy was first, remember that picture I showed you earlier, the bottom right-hand side, was the execution part. Get the execution, make sure we have all the products that address those different channels. So if I can, for those of you not aware of these products, you can see what they do. Right? So you build some, since we also have a platform that does business intelligence, we've tied that into our marketing products as well, so you understand what you're doing. So that's the first thing we did as a strategy, is create the execution layer and the slew of products that you need to handle that. So you don't have to deal with that slide of 7,000 that you saw earlier. Next, what else have we adapted from here? So I'm going to walk through 4 or 5 different traits and show you some examples of that across our products, so you can see it. So I talked about personalized marketing. So what have we done to adapt our products against personalized marketing? So this is this is actually a search page, and it's the product I'm illustrating is Page Sense. If you look at the top right-hand corner in all of these slides, you'll see what product it is. So it's Page Sense, and this is really a search ad on the right. So companies using a search ad, and the Page Sense, as some of you might know, it's a website optimization tool, so it runs on your website, so people visiting your website can see the right stuff. So somebody comes and clicks on this ad. Remember, this ad talks about a particular discount. You get onto the home page, and the home page is dynamically changed for that customer. Right? Personalized. It's personalized to that customer. So that's an example of personalized marketing. Now, each of these examples doesn't do something massive, but if you see them all collectively together, you start to see how marketing is actually changed across all these platforms. Second example I'd like to walk here is Backstage. Many of you using Backstage to monitor this event. We're running this event on Backstage. And if you go to your agenda, you have a way to personalize it and pick up your own agenda. So I noticed that several of you had skipped this speech, and so you have all these empty chairs on the other side. So you can personalize this agenda and decide what you want to attend. Email campaigns. So here's a notion of, there's a notion of tags in these campaigns where you can actually be personal, you can capture the name of a person, you can capture where they come from, or whatever information that you know about the customer, dynamically insert it back into your communications with them, so it's personal. You say, hello, Harry, not hello, customer. So let's take the second trend, targeted marketing. So targeted marketing is going after separate segments, separate audiences. So let's look at some examples over here. So this one is in survey, and here we're asking a question, and it's depending on the response to the first question, the next question changes. So that is, you're targeting that particular audience with a different set of questions. Here's an example from social. So this is a way to, basically at the bottom left-hand corner, you can't observe it, there's a way to actually pick up the messages you set up and personalize them and target them for specific geographies. So you can say, for the US, I'm going to do something different. I don't know why these two countries are clubbed together, but maybe some marketer had a reason. So that's an example of targeting within social. Here's a third example in Sales IQ. So this is setting up how you respond to visitors on your website. So you classify visitors in certain ways, you understand what they're doing, and you set up different work rules that allows you to respond to customers in different ways. So that's an example. Let's talk about dynamic marketing. You can see all of these are related. Dynamic marketing is tied into personal marketing, which is tied into targeting the right audience that for your business. So here's another example from social. So on the right-hand side, you can see this is a tweet stream of tweets that are coming through. And when you select one of them, you can see information right there in real time, dynamically, about that person is tweeting. You can even engage with that person in a chat. Here's a second example of dynamic marketing in the context of emails. So you can set up some rules there. So based on these rules, it shows a different message as part of your campaign. So in orange, the orange section show you how the section changes when a different rule is applied. Here you have a notion of A/B testing, or what people call split testing. And this is very popular today in marketing because we don't often know how campaigns work. So what we wind up doing is we try things out, we sample it. And this is a classic technique, actually, that's used by statisticians for a long time. So you sample something, you see how it works, and then you go into with a larger part of the population. Same thing here. So you can see in the middle of the screen, there are two different plans that have been set up, A and B, and you test that, and based on some metric for what's successful, then you execute the remaining, 70% of your campaign. So this is an example of dynamic marketing. So you can apply this across different aspects of marketing. Here's another example to do with Backstage. You have, this is the page sense technology applied to Backstage. We have an agenda for a site, for an event like this. We can actually see what people are looking at, what interests them, even before we run this event. So we've been watching this for months now, looking at how people look at our agenda to get an idea of what are they actually interested in. So it gives you a heat map of what people to do, what people want to do, or what they're interested in. Another example of dynamic marketing. Automation. A few examples over here. So I'm going to show you how you can automate media posts. This is from Zoho Social. The idea is you're working across multiple channels, a lot of things you want to say. You want to put some method into that madness, so you orchestrate these posts and you let them go out at periods that make sense, maybe even optimize for the time of the day, which of course the business intelligence behind the application will tell you. So that's an example of automation, work that doesn't have to be done. Second example is email workflows. So you can see two big sections there, the if section and the then section. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to embed some logic or build in some logic into your email campaigning plan, which says if certain things happen, this is how I'm going to do it. So we have a builder that allows you to build up those rules and automate how you do your work. Chatbots, we call this thing Zobot. So these are, again, ways of automation responding to customers on your site. You can program these to work on specific domains and get to your customers to talk about that. Okay, so what's missing across all this? We've walked through the different products. We've walked through the different trends around personalization and customization and so on. And the big part is the orchestration. So what does that mean? And that's what's going to lead us to the new product we have today. So I'm going to introduce today the product we're going to introduce at this event. It's Marketing Hub. So I'm going to share a few screenshots. There's going to be a detailed section on it, just to give you an idea of what it's about. Obviously, any product we have today needs to have analytics, so you can look at the analytics of all your marketing programs across channels from one place. That's a big deal. And think of what I said earlier. All these things have now come together under one zone of control, and you want the person running it or in charge of it to be able to see across all of these programs. This is an example of planning. So the bottom part of the screen, you have some budgeting stuff. So here the planner is trying to say, at the top of the screen, you can see the different channels, email, social, and so on. And so this is a planning screen. What are we trying to do? We're trying to orchestrate planning across all of the different channels. Another example here. So this is to do with understanding how your channels or lead sources are performing. So on the left-hand side, you see different types of sources that you use to generate leads. On the right-hand side, you see outcomes. So the outcomes, top to bottom, go from least desired to most desired. So you have a raw lead going all the way down. You have something that you're ready to contact through marketing, and all the way down is something that's someone who's ready to actually buy. You've accomplished purchase intent. So how do you basically measure the effectiveness of these different programs and see what they're actually driving? What are the programs and what outcomes are they driving? One place to see all of it. So that's another example. This is one of the new ideas that you should watch from what we do. This is the idea of a journey. I talked about what a journey is. It's a way to craft a unique path for different people in your audience based on what they do. So here in a journey, you have some sort of a trigger that it could be a response or a lack of response to something. Somebody comes to your website, and then let's say they left in 10 seconds or in 20 seconds. That's one data point. What do you do with that person? This is a journey that's been created for what they call remarketing. So somebody came and just left. So you watch that as a trigger, set up a journey for that kind of a customer. What do you do? Another example of a journey might be that somebody came in and has signed up, in our case, has registered. So what's the journey for them? The two shouldn't be the same, right? So you define different journeys for the same activity, which is re-engaging with somebody who has originally engaged with you. So that's the notion of a journey. So this was done for re-engagement. So this is the screen where it's set up, and you can see on the left, you're setting up the triggers, and on the right, you're playing around with it and deciding how you're going to use it and adapt it and so on. So you'll see that as part of the program today. This is an example of connecting and engaging with customers. So in this case, you can see, again, we're moving across channels. In the process of engagement, you can send them a message or find a way to communicate with them. Now, Marketing Hub does not sit on its own, because it's really the orchestrator, right? So it has to work with all these different marketing programs that are actually doing the execution and some of the planning. So that's what you see. I'm sure you can't, I don't know if you can read this, but across the circle is basically a whole slew of products that it connects to. So it connects to, as you would expect, it connects to almost every Zoho product that has something to do with this. So you have survey, you have email, social, and all of that stuff. We also connect to a very vast number of third-party products, because think of what this product is trying to do. It's trying to orchestrate a function that may involve a choice of channels, involve a choice of products, some of which you take from Zoho, and some of which you might have chosen to go elsewhere. So we're doing the orchestration for you. So we've moved from, the other thing we've done with Marketing Hub is we've included a number of pre-built journeys for Commerce Plus. Marketing Hub will also be part of Zoho One. So to summarize, we have a comprehensive marketing platform, the execution, and now we've got the stuff that goes on top of it and helps you tie it all together across all these channels. I'm going to change gears. So I talked about marketing automation, and I talked about the orchestration of marketing. So from here, I'm going to move to the orchestration of all work. So when you think of your business, it's work. So whatever work you do, you're running a logistics firm, you're running a winery, whatever you do, you're orchestrating your work. How do you use technology to help you manage that? So that's what I'm going to talk about in this next segue. So we're going to start with the caveman again. And as you can see, they were orchestrating work quite some time ago. Perhaps not the most efficient way, but had steps on what things they were planning to do as well. So people have been thinking about how to do work for a while. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question here. If you as a company are thinking about orchestrating work, and you know that you have to deploy technology to do that, meaning software, so what are you going to do? What are your choices? How do you approach this problem? So if you look back over the history of technology and software last 30, 40 years, these are the two predominant choices that have been available to customers. So they either use commercial software, that is ready-made software like stuff from Zoho and others, or they custom build their apps. You have to build something that works for them, that works for their business. You know, it would surprise you to see how big the custom app market still is. A lot of companies use a ton of custom apps. We use custom apps ourselves. We take something like Zoho Creator, that some of you may know, and we build a lot of our own apps, and we keep doing it. We have hundreds of them. And I'll get to the reason why we do this. So let's see how you make this decision and what drives that. So if you're going with commercial software, you have some obvious advantages, right? Someone else is doing the work. So you get to benefit from, you have lower costs. They're going to maintain it. They're going to innovate it. They're going to do these things. They're going to deploy it for you, especially in the cloud world. And if you're going to go with custom solutions, it handles custom requirements. That's a plus. It's a fit for you. It's not something that you just pick off the shelf and make it work. And it builds differentiation, because that's why you're trying to do it. You're trying to customize a particular process that you think is advantageous. And of course, these come with other negatives, but the flip side of it, won't focus on that now. So here's a question that I want to ask you. It's complicated to do custom software. It's a lot more expensive. Why do companies do it? We've been in this business of commercial software for a long time now. All the companies you hear about in technology are commercial software companies. So why are they still building custom software today? So I was thinking about this when I put together this deck about a week ago, and I was saying, how do you articulate, why would I make a decision like this? And this is what I came up with. The first thing is, what are you looking to do? You're looking to model a unique business process. That's what you're trying to do with custom software. And if you look at a unique business process, this is what I mean by that. So you're in business, or you're successful in business because you have some intrinsic business knowledge. So think about some examples of your own business. Think about a winemaker. Think about a cabinet maker. Think about somebody doing last mile logistics, whatever. So they have some intrinsic business knowledge, which is the reason for their existence, and hopefully the reason for their ongoing success. So that knowledge gets translated into some sort of proprietary method. So you do logistics a certain way, or you do your wine processing a certain way, and that's a method proprietary to you. And that's what gives you the advantage in the market. Going down the slide, it creates the market differentiation for you. And a consequence of that differentiation is where it all bears fruit in terms of competitive advantage, your ability to get a bigger market share, or your ability to charge more for your product, or both, right? So that's the core essence of what companies do with their businesses. This is probably the most fundamental slide in this section. So this is why companies want to automate stuff. Yet, what happens? A lot of times when you get to software, you start to use generic processes where you start to lose out on the fundamental differentiation you've brought to your processes. That's what I'm going to get to. So while you model the first process, the next thing you want to do is you want all the other things that commercial software gives you. You want the ability to manage exceptions to your process. You want the ability to ensure compliance, make sure the right people are responsible, all the kind of stuff that goes into process management. You want that too. Commercial software is good at this stuff. It's not very good at the other stuff, because they have to generalize processes like a sales process and lay it out in software that any company from any industry has to use. So this together, the modeling of your work and the ability to execute it in an efficient way, is what constitutes the orchestration of work. So can you do both? Can you retain the differentiation in your processes, and can you get everything that commercial software also gets you? And I think you do have a way. And I'm going to introduce you the second product, Zoho Orchestration. Okay, I'm going to briefly describe this, show you some screens, and then move along. So what is Zoho Orchestration? It's a way to orchestrate your work using workflows. because every piece of work is actually a workflow. So I'll touch on a few things here. It automates and models the business process. It allows you to execute it efficiently, so you can track it, you can remain compliant, you can perhaps audit it, and things like that. Over time, as you run these work processes, so think of a specific process you're doing, maybe it's procurement. So if you're running this process over time, it watches at the back and looks for how the process is executed. How much time does it take? Does it go through certain paths more frequently than other paths? Should you be simplifying the process or adding some stages? Those kinds of things. So that's the optimization. And of course, it works for every kind of industry because it's a generalized work process, regardless of size. So I'm going to give you an example. Think of an auto repair shop. What happens? A customer comes in, they have an issue, they lay it out. Right? So they express their issue, and that's what I'm calling a request. So think of this, I'm giving you this example, but apply it in something that works for any process you know. So they have a request. It outlines what they need to get done. It's a repair of, in this case, it's a car. The auto body shop has their own process, and if they have their process, they might look at it and say, this is it a body, is it something for the body shop? Is it something to do with the mechanicals or the engine? So they might break it up that way, send it to the right place. They might have other considerations. So they might look at whether the customer has been a long-time customer or not. My auto body shop first thing they look to see is if it's an insurance job, then they know they can charge you a lot. So depending on what you want to do, you want to send it down a path, right? So that's the workflow you're trying to capture. So the first thing that comes in is this request from the customer. So what happens after the request? The request has to turn into a job or a work order. The key word here is job, because we're going to use that word in the product. So it turns into a job. So it's a job, it's Vijay's job. So the order came in, it's Vijay's order. So that's what you're trying to implement or execute in the system. And how do you do that? You go through a repair process, and that's the workflow that's set up and automated, so when the job comes into the shop, they can automatically take care of things. It goes to the right people, it sends the right notifications, does whatever needs to get done to accomplish that. So in the schematic of the product, this is what it looks like. There's a layout, which is the way you capture the information. And the layout results in a job, and we call that, unsurprisingly, a job. And you go from the job to a blueprint. Okay, so we got another fancy term we're throwing at you. So it's a blueprint, which is really the workflow. And that's what on the extreme left, I'm going to capture that and explain that a little bit. So the workflow, you have a notion of, there are only two things that make up a workflow. You have a notion of a stage that tells you where you are, and you have a notion of a transition that moves you from one stage to another. If you think of any workflow, that's how it's executed. So there are decision points involved, some things that happen that move the job from one stage to another. That's it, right? So you can model any piece of work like this. So this is how the Orchestly is set up, and these are the primitives you're going to see. So let me give you some examples of how this thing looks. This is a workflow that's been designed, or a blueprint that's been designed for procurement. So this is a procurement process. Don't get lost in the process per se. Just observe the core elements of it. You can see the different stages. The decision points are in color, and the white ones, the dark ones are decision points or transitions, and the ones in between them are the stages. So right now, I'm at the transition, which is send vendor requirements. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm at that stage of this, so you can see where the paths are. So this is how a blueprint looks like. So let me give you an example of what a job looks like. It's exactly what you would expect when you went to the mechanic. You filled in a form, or they gave you an iPad and you filled in your details. So this is what a job looks like. It's just a set of details that needs to fit into a job. So this is the form. So here, in this case, you can see at the top, we are looking at this job at a particular stage, and we're looking at the next set of transitions. The stage is the stage I showed you earlier, top left-hand corner, which says vendor quotation sent. And you can see that the transitions, two things can happen, or three things can happen. It can get rejected, approved, or it can be put on hold. So this is a process for procuring stuff. Let's say furniture in your office. And you have, in a company like ours, we're large enough that we've got to put together a process for some of these things. So that's a job. And this is the second page of the same thing. So that was the first half of the screen. This is the second half. It's just here to show you that you can attach things to it. There's a section where you can have an interactive discussion with somebody. So it's not just a static piece of information. It is dynamic, and it allows you to engage with people in the course of executing that job. So if you look at the right-hand side and the right-hand corner, you can see it tells you it belongs to the purchase approval blueprint, and I'm at this stage. So what if I want to see the blueprint? Maybe I'm in the middle of this. I want to see what it looks like. You just go to the right and say preview, and it shows you the whole blueprint and where you are. I'm in the stage which is in blue, which says send vendor quotations, and those are my two options. And the person looking at this previous screen was possibly the person approving it, approving that particular stage, right? So they can see where they are in the process and what's going on. So we can't have any marketing product without reporting, or analytics. So we have, in this case, what you're seeing on the left-hand side is actually a myriad of workflows, a number of them, across different things that the organization might do. Trademark request, shipping request, onboarding request, various things that a company needs to process. Each has been modeled as its own workflow, and then you can see some reporting across that. Each one of these opens into a whole bunch of reports. I won't get into that, but I want to give you a flair of what this does. So you have the reporting will tell you how much time was spent through it, the paths that were taken commonly, things like that, so you can optimize the workflow itself over time. Okay, so where can you use all this stuff? So I talked about a winery, I talked about other places. So here's some examples. The short answer is everywhere. So you think of anything you do, you can use workflows to enable that. So that's what fundamentally this product Orchestly does. It respects the fact that people have built differentiation fundamentally into their business processes, and you might, even if you use commercial software, you might need to adapt your process, but you still want all the benefits of commercial software in terms of compliance and costs and everything else, but the flexibility to define and execute your process exactly how you want it. So that's what this product does. It can be applied in a number of industries. I think I've hit the end of my session here, so thank you for your time.